Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, after reading that the IDC forecasts worldwide spending on cloud services will pass $1 trillion by 2024, I thought it was time that I dived a little bit deeper in on the subject. For example, why securing and governing multi-cloud environments is a top IT challenge right now, and something that most enterprises are facing right now as cloud adoption accelerates amid the pandemic. So I turned to Keith Neilson, technical evangelist at a company called CloudSphere, onto the podcast. And CloudSphere helps organizations simplify cloud management by automating governance, minimizing security risks, and managing costs from a single platform. So I asked him to come on the podcast. Thankfully, he agreed. So he's going to discuss all that and much more with me. And we will also discuss how this challenge has driven demand for CloudSphere's solution and how they're helping organisations simplify cloud management and avoid those costly breaches that we keep reading about in the news every day. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK so you can join me and Keith in conversation in 3, 2, 1... So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Neil. I'm Keith Neilson. I'm the technical evangelist for CloudSphere, based in the UK, in a place called Milton Keynes, full of roundabouts, if anyone's ever been. I've been in the technology space now for 15 or so years. Spent the majority of that in software, but I have worked in a really varied spectrum of different technologies and areas of the industry, from distribution, resellers, startups, all different stages, different locations around the world, and really just interested in technology and general trends and changes and use cases that we see, customers, partners. I spend a lot of time with analysts and reporters. That kind of thing. So, it's great.
I once did indoor skydiving in Milton Keynes. Is that still there?
It is. I've done it. And I had an epic fail there, actually. Didn't work out very well. They turned it on and they get you to lie down, don't they? If you remember, sort of fall forward. And I just fell forward. So, I won't be going back.
Have you got a DVD of that footage?
I do, but it's locked away, that one.
Now, I always think that technical evangelist has got to be one of the coolest job titles in the world. But I'm curious, What is your origin story? Where did your love of tech come from? And what was it that put you on the path you're on today?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it is a cool title. I have to say I've kind of aspired to it for a while. Yeah. I'm certainly proud to call myself a tech evangelist and, be able to do what I do. I guess, interestingly or not, depending on how you want to look at it, I actually started my sort of working life outside of technology. I played a lot of golf, and, from a young age, that's what I did. That was my hobby and my love, if you like. And, I play pretty much every day after school, and was kind of pushed into maybe pursuing playing for a living. And so I ended up going into the golf industry and trying to do that. And I turned a scholarship down when I was quite young, in South Carolina, which I maybe questioned sometimes why I didn't do that. But I wasn't really ready at the time, if I'm being honest. And, you kind of struggle with a bit of luck of the draw with the support that you get, with coaches and people wanting to invest in you. And I simply didn't have the money to get lessons every day. And I kind of just fell out of it. I fell out of love with that, which is a real shame. But it happens. I'm sure I'm not the only one. My love of computers has always been there, again, from a young age. My dad worked in tech all his career. He'd come back with new laptops and machines, and unfortunately for him, I'd sit there and break them, play around with them, see what happens if you did this, if you did that. And of course, he'd then get me to repair them because, he needed to work. So I kind of grown up with this real interest in them, as I'm sure a lot of people have. And, I sort of grew up understanding them through a break fix type mentality, as you do when you're young, and so I've kind of always had an interest in computers. And when the sort of golf fell by the wayside and I fell out of love, my first role, I decided that's what I was, going to follow my dad. And my first role was with Ingram Micro, so in distribution, and I was the component specialist. And looking back, it was a really fantastic opportunity that I had, and a great start to my career, because I do love to learn. Like, my nature is I love learning. I love talking about what I've learned. I love educating and listening and understanding. And the role essentially allowed me to learn. So, I was working with all the big names that you've heard of: Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Supermicro, memory vendors. And I was really put through low-level training with all of those. So I right from the bat, I had this really fantastic opportunity to understand how all of the underlying components in a computer system, be it a server or a client machine or whatever, actually work, and how they work together. And I'd support the sales teams internally. I'd support the reseller channel. I'd support specialists and customers understand, why one chip differed from another, and why it was faster, what the architecture was, and how that made it different. And I think, looking back, that really helped start off my abilities, if you like, in terms of advocating and explaining and enjoying what I do. And from there, really, I sort of moved off into reseller land and worked for a big European reseller in the support team. And that saw me grow into the architecture team, the technical architecture team, where I was designing core infrastructure, servers, virtualization, compute, and cloud projects. I gained a raft of certification during that time. And interestingly, and I think really quite a cool opportunity at the time is, this is looking back when Apple landed with the first iPhone. And at the time, what they were doing is releasing management APIs. And I had a really good, through the reseller I was working with, I had a really great opportunity to work closely with Apple. And I was one of only a handful, I think 4 or 5 at the time, that was working with Apple that way, trying to understand how we could take that to the enterprise, and working with the MDM vendors that were popping up at that time. So that was really exciting. And I ended up taking on the specialization of mobile technologies and in the enterprise. And I ended up moving off into one of those MDM vendors and built out the pre-sales engineering team. And I guess, those pre-sales traits have always been there. It's, I love learning and articulating how things work, but I also love explaining that in different ways to different audiences, and hearing from them what their requirements are, and kind of digesting that and translating that into solutions. And I've worked in a number of different, like I said, technology areas. One of them was around app modernization and the development of applications, and taking legacy and making that modern, working with discovery technologies. And there's a whole bunch of different areas that I've worked in, which is great. I think that's really given me the ability to understand different areas, and the traits that have allowed me to do what I do here, as an evangelist. And I think those traits and achievements and experience have been recognized by the team at CloudSphere and the leadership, and I thank them for that. It's allowed me to advocate internally and externally, and that's actually really what I do. It's, whilst I'm the face to the industry, trying to advocate and explain how our technology works and why you should use it, and looking at the different trends that are going on and how that affects our technology. I'm also doing that internally. I do a lot of work. I'm the conduit into all of the different business units: development, engineering, product, marketing, sales, and I kind of help drive the whole business forward, advocating requirements internally as well as externally. So, these are the things I love doing at the end of the day, and it certainly gives me the opportunity to do that.
What a great story. I love how it started with golf and you ended up in tech. And wasn't Phil Mickelson, wasn't he nearly 51 when he won the PGA Tour? So you've still got time, right?
Exactly. I mean, how inspiring is that? That's what I keep telling myself. Yeah.
And here in the present day, can you tell me more about the kind of problems that CloudSphere solves for its customers, especially for people tuning in and hearing about CloudSphere for the very first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So CloudSphere, it looks to solve, I guess, two main topics. Really, a high level, we're a cloud governance platform. What I mean by that is we look to help the complexities and challenges that customers, enterprises, and service providers actually, managed service providers actually have supporting the journeys to the cloud and the journeys once you're in the cloud. The sort of maturity levels that a customer will go on as they move forward with their cloud journeys. And so we help customers move up those maturity models, to a more optimized state. We help with what we call firstly as sort of day one challenges. Day one referring to the planning and migration phase of a journey. Those questions that customers have, which is, what can I move? How can I move it? What are the costs going to be? Does that stack up? In more detail, what dependencies do my applications have? What's the risk associated with moving one application over another? Can I actually do that with the nature of the dependencies? And so CloudSphere uniquely provides the context within the application space to be able to answer those questions in a unique way. And we help you plan, and we help you really have a successful migration to the cloud. And that doesn't have to be new customers, right? We've got plenty of customers now that are in the cloud, and they're looking at moving what's already there forward. And obviously, like a lot of customers have done, is they've left the really complex, nasty stuff. And CloudSphere is actually really quite tuned in to helping with those complex, SAP applications, Epic applications, where you've got really complex interdependencies, and you need the context of, recognizing an application server over a web server, over a database server, and having that information. So that's the first thing that we do. The second thing we do is once you're there, right, what we call day two operations. And this is where once we've got services and instances running in the cloud, how do we ensure that we've got the right guardrails in place to actually protect them from misconfiguration? How do we proactively make sure that that's in place before it becomes a problem? How do we secure those instances and the cloud services that's running so that they have the adequate and suitable policy that matches the nature of the dynamic environments that we see? And again, it's about having the context of what makes up those applications in the cloud, what makes up your workloads. And we look at the data, the instances, the services, the apps themselves, and the identity on top of that, with an extensible rules engine that we can leverage with policy to ensure that that vision is actually brought forward to the customer. They can have visibility, which is lacking in most places, certainly across multi-cloud, and reduce those risks, reduce the attack surface footprint, and help optimize the operation of their cloud environments. And that's really what we do at a high level.
And IDC forecasts worldwide spending on cloud services are expected to surpass an incredible $1 trillion by 2024. So can you tell me more about why securing and governing multi-cloud environments is actually a huge IT challenge facing enterprises as cloud adoption continues to accelerate, especially during the pandemic, and we're heading towards a hybrid working environment too?
Yeah, exactly. It's a really good point, and it's a trend that we have actually really genuinely seen ourselves. It's not just an analyst statement. It really is true, and I think the sudden drive and need to embrace more flexible infrastructure and services has seen uptake in the cloud more so. I think we've seen a lot of customers plan, and tinker in places. And obviously, a lot have actually gone and moved and are consuming, of course. But I think generally that the what we're seeing is that a lot of perhaps hesitancy and time that was taken before has really accelerated. Right? People know that they've almost been forced in ways. Remote learning. You've got applications and services that weren't ultimately designed to service that kind of rollout, and so we've seen these projects and transformations have to change and have to modernize, and the way of doing that clearly is with the cloud, right? It's elastic. You've got advantages in terms of service uptime and reliability and all of the great things that we've heard so much about over many years now. But I think that really has accelerated. I think the challenges that we have with that is that there's danger in rushing, right? Because cloud isn't, and this is the challenge that I think some customers have out there, is that they look at cloud as if it's on-prem, right? It's just some compute resource, like it would be at home, and it's not. And actually, it's an opportunity to really change and transform your processes and your methodologies, and it should be that way. And so there's a risk, from a security perspective, as an example, as you're racing now towards migrating, just to keep your business running, just to give your users access, that you make sure that you've got a handle on threats, right? There'll be some new ones there, and you've got a handle on the vulnerabilities that you might be exposed to. Misconfiguration is a big one, and so we're just trying to help customers now be mindful of. And clearly we play on both sides, as you've seen, right? We do day one, we help with the migration and the planning. So we've absolutely seen a huge uptake in that. But equally, we're well positioned to help with those considerations as they move and once they're there. And that's a real key point. And I think it's important that we're keeping track of those security threats.
And I'm curious, how have these challenges driven demand for CloudSphere solutions? Have you noticed a big uptake?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we say, I mean, the platform supports those use cases from planning and discovery for migration, all the way through to the security and governance of the instances and the services that you have in the cloud. We've seen a rise in the number of assessments and discovery engagements that we're performing. Our tooling is used a lot by not only service partners and enterprises themselves, but equally the cloud service providers. Have programs where they're actually funding the use of our tool just to get through the number of assessments and discovery analysis that customers are needing to help them get to the cloud. We've seen a huge uptake in that, and equally, we've seen an influx in the more mature organizations, some that are already there. As I said before, starting that sort of second and third wave, and that's moving away from the lower hanging fruit, as it were, the lift and shift approaches that have already happened, perhaps, into the more considered designs, the more complex line of business applications, where absolutely, risk and business impact is a real consideration, perhaps more than it was with some of the low hanging fruit, the quick wins, and our platform thrives with that too. So there's this inherent need to make sure we are compliant, we've got governance, we've got security visibility, we've got the policies in place, they match the dynamic nature of the cloud. Again, like I said, it's about having the right tooling that's clearly designed purposefully for the elastic and dynamic nature of cloud. You can't treat this like you were before, where things are fixed and you're comfortable. It's ever changing. There's new services every day that you've got to keep up with, and that's what our platform helps with.
And the immense cloud governance gaps enterprises are experiencing right now ultimately leave sensitive data vulnerable to breaches. And the reason I bring that up is I recently read CloudSphere had released a report or a research which found that an incredible 32% of enterprises experienced unauthorized access to cloud resources, and another 19% were completely unaware if unauthorized access had even occurred. I mean, can you expand on the insights gained from that report?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting. I mean, we did, as you say, carry out our own research earlier in the year, and we did have some really interesting finds. There's a lot of, I guess, sort of sub-messaging there in the data that we had. Essentially, the data indicated that there was a void in, I guess, in some customers. They're still not really fully aligned to the shared responsibility models that are in place. There appeared to be some confusion and lack of awareness of when a breach or a vulnerability actually occurs, who informs them. There's some data points that suggested that they were expecting their cloud provider to tell them. As an example, how do they actually find out whether there's a vulnerability, and whose responsibility is it to actually even detect a breach? There seems to be a level of confusion, certainly that was indicated through that reporting. And there was also a really interesting find, which over the course of a number of data points said that they felt like they had control over their cloud environments, but like you say, 32% of them actually had experienced unauthorized access and 19% were unaware. So the reality is that a lot of enterprises are not as prepared as they think. I think that, they perhaps don't have the correctly calibrated instruments to check. And as we saw, some of them are even confused that it's for them to deploy and manage those instruments to detect in the first place. So ultimately, the cloud, as we know, isn't just this elastic compute platform that gives us all of the advantages that we know about as a pay and play basis. It's transformation. Like we've said before, it's not just a technical process, but it's a culture change. And we have to ensure that these challenges that we have in things like security are monitored and controlled through the right lens. And it's not the same one that you're using before. And so some really interesting finds with that survey and report, as you say.
And having visibility into which users have access to data and resources is increasingly difficult. And I think that will be something that every business leader has grappled with, especially due to the complex nature of cloud environments. But can you expand on the best practices for them to help manage cloud access rights and improve that situation?
Yeah. Exactly, and this was another data point that was obviously part of that report. I think really for us, and the best practice recommendations there would be keyword being visibility. We found throughout, from those day one tasks of understanding the nature of an application, what belongs to it, what servers are actually part of it, what's the application that's running, the software that's actually running, and how is that communicating? All the day one tasks, but equally on day two and beyond, right, where we're looking at things like cloud access rights, it's very easy to have these complex user access and group access rights take on a life of their own. All too often we see permissions being inherited unintentionally, unaware even, access that wasn't intended or more of an issue. You aren't even aware that you'd actually inherited or it being provisioned. Visibility is key. And enterprises I think are realizing that they, need to remain in a competitive state with public cloud providers. And so, they're achieving that by having multi-cloud strategies, dual or multi. And that actually only concentrates the problem, right? Because you've got all of these different native tools. They're all different. There's different APIs that are involved in actually controlling different policies. Trying to do that across 2 or 3 different cloud environments is a real challenge. The skills that you need are in short supply. You'll have subject matter experts, but to have them in all 3 cloud providers at a level that you need is a real challenge. And so, that's where we're strong, because it is a multi-cloud play. We provide that agnostic single view, no matter how many cloud environments you have. And we'll give you that visibility across all of them in a very consistent approach. So I would say the best practice approach here would be, perhaps broken into three groups, 3 simple phases. One would be understand your cloud usage and risk first and foremost. Identify your sensitive data, your regulated data, understand how that data is actually being accessed and shared, who needs it. This is actually something that we pick up in day one, but it's discover shadow IT, right? Shadow rogue IT is a real thing. It's fascinating how often we come across this when we're doing discovery and we map out this application, completely mapped, topology mapped, and we discover some unknown IPs. It turns out it's another database even, or another application server, something quite critical that wasn't known. So that's absolutely something that needs to be identified. And you want to be able to audit this, so having some mechanism to actually check and audit configurations for identity, keep track of changes and activity is key, and that can help you obviously uncover malicious behavior and activity. I'd say then phase 2 is about applying the right policy, making sure that you've got encryption where you need it and it's the right level of encryption. Set limitations on how that data is actually shared and accessed. Look for anomalies and look for tooling that actually allows you to do that. And then lastly, I would say is sort of phase 3, if you like, which is all about responding to those issues, because it's one thing to listen for them, but really from what we're seeing, there's a massive issue around noise, kind of being overwhelmed, especially in these multi-cloud environments, right? You've got 3 rounds of alerts, if you like, now to look at. Which one do I actually prioritize? Which one's important? Which one's closer to that sensitive data that we've already identified? So, looking and controlling those influx of alerts with thresholds, having the context that would help you prioritize them, I think is really key. And so that's what I would sort of say is a sort of best practice approach.
And what's next for CloudSphere? Is there anything you can share about what your big focus is going to be for the rest of the year and beyond? I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but is there anything you can leave with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it touches on the last point. I think really it fits in nicely. I mean, for us, we're trying to help with the problem that exists right now around that lack of context, especially when we look specifically at cloud security alerts, knowing what really needs attention and why. And to do this, we need a level of automation, but we also need the context behind it to allow it to function. We want to help with the problem from having that influx of alerts from all of these different angles without actually really having the context on their nature or importance to prioritize them. It's not good enough to just say, hey, you've got an open port here. What we need is a level of information that says, yeah, it's an open port, but actually it's non-critical. It's got data that we don't really care about so much. It's having that context that would allow you to say, okay, we'll deal with that one later, but right now actually we've got a tier one that really is close to important sensitive data. There's something that's a misconfiguration there. We've got access that we didn't intend for, and so it's providing that context. That's really what we're trying to achieve, and that's what we're working on next. So working on context of data, network, compute, the apps, the identity that sits on top, and actually providing value back into all of those alerts to help those operations and security teams quickly pinpoint the issues that need attention.
As a technical evangelist, I imagine you've had every possible question thrown your way, but I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball in your direction now, because a question I always like to ask my guests is if there is a particular song that has inspired them throughout their tech career or just helps them get their head in the zone before going in a big meeting, delivering a keynote, or even going on the play a game of golf. I don't know. But is there a particular song that means anything to you?
Yeah, it is a curveball, that one. That's a hard question to answer as well. Oh, wow. I mean, one song. I mean, I like lots of different types of music. Yeah. If I'm being really truthful and honest, I like my sort of heavy rock music. In answer to your question, what really motivates me and gets me going there, I'd have to say it's a Metallica song, Enter Sandman.
Yeah.
That kind of inspires me, motivates me. I'll listen to that music kind of, in the gym. If I'm getting ready, if I've got something, I'll even listen to that when I'm working, actually. So, yeah.
Great choice. I'll be adding that one to the Spotify playlist for the show. But before I let you go, can I ask that you remind everyone listening where they can find CloudSphere online and equally contact you or your team if they've got any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So on LinkedIn, obviously, and other social platforms, it has to be said. If you wanted to connect with me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, of course. Happy to chat and talk some more about all of the things that we've discussed, if anyone wants to. For CloudSphere information, product information, if you wanted a demo, if you wanted to see how we can help, if you've got some challenges that you think we might be able to help with, obviously check out our website, cloudsphere.com. And don't forget to follow us on the likes of LinkedIn and social platforms. So CloudSphere is on LinkedIn too, and Twitter. We often use those actually as a means of updating and discussing what we're up to. So, feel free to check that out and reach out if you wanted to. But yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll have those links to the show notes so people can find you nice and easily. But I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to come on here today and sharing how organizations can simplify cloud management, avoid costly breaches. So much gold in today's conversation for me. But more than anything, again, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
So a big thank you to Keith for sharing his story today and why having visibility into which users have access to data and resources is becoming increasingly difficult due to the complex nature of cloud environments. But also for talking about the best practices for enterprises when managing cloud access rights. But as always, please share your experiences, questions, pictures to come on the show by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. But another interview has come to an end. Another episode has come to an end. So once again, it's time to thank you for listening to the podcast. And I do genuinely mean that. I'll return to your podcast feed tomorrow, bright and early, as soon as you awake. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.